What if the most dangerous part of a war is not the strike itself, but the pause that makes people believe the worst may be over? In this urgent analysis, General Jack Keane argues that Iran's latest proposal is not a real off-ramp, but a stall tactic, a way to buy time, ease pressure, and survive long enough to reshape the battlefield. And if that is true, then this ceasefire is not a sign of peace at all. It is a test of will. Because beneath the language of negotiation, deadlines, and diplomacy, Keane sees something more unsettling taking shape. A regime trying to outlast consequences, and an American president being pushed toward the decision of whether to end the war or finish it.
The nuclear question is the reason why we're in this in the first place. If Iran was just a radical country run by radical people, it'd still be a problem. But they are revolutionary. There's no doubt in my mind that at some point in the future, if this radical clerical regimes remain in charge in Iran, they will decide they want a nuclear weapon.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio on the key issue driving the conflict with Iran and its nuclear program. President Trump is said to be unhappy with the regime's latest ceasefire proposal, namely because Iran does not address its atomic ambitions. And joining us now is retired General Jack Keane. He's a Fox News senior strategic analyst and could not have a better guest today. I wanted to mention this because I thought it brought it all together. Richard Haass, who is a foreign policy guy in D.C., I know you've known him for a while, he wrote this today that basically, the president should take Iran up on its offer, saying that Iran has reportedly proposed to the U.S. that the two countries focusing on reopening the Strait of Hormuz and postpone consideration of Iran's nuclear program and other issues. The United States should accept this approach and suggest these negotiations commence as quickly as possible. Do you agree?
I don't think that's a deal that's acceptable to President Trump. I mean, we're 3 weeks into this ceasefire. We went to the ceasefire, remember, they shut down the Straits of Hormuz. The president took a look at it, thought maybe there's a possibility of getting some negotiations here, set a deadline. We're a week past the deadline. The Iranians have made numbers of proposals to us. None of them have been acceptable to the president, all for very good reasons, because they're not meeting our objectives. And I don't think that's the Iranians' objective. I think their objective is really just to stall and drag out these negotiations so that there's more pressure on the president in terms of the economic situation and the political situation. They believe time is on their side, and they will eventually get maybe two things. One, the president to stop the war entirely and just accept the status quo, or two, make concessions to a deal that they are not prepared to make right now. So I think where we really are is likely a reassessment at the meeting yesterday that took place in the White House on this subject to plot a pathway forward. I think, to me, the obvious pathway forward is finish what we started. The negotiations have not worked. So go back to the combat operations, finish up the last 2 weeks that we were not able to complete, about 25% of what is left. Go back to the original objective, take away all of their offensive capability so that they will no longer be a predator in the region. Let's accomplish that mission. Let's also open the Straits of Hormuz. All of that makes some sense. And at the same time, if we're not already doing it, I think the Mossad and the CIA should be doing everything that they can inside of Iran to undermine this regime, because there is no doubt the regime is getting weaker by the day as the economic issues begin to really take its toll. I'd make one more point. For those who believe that all we should do is continue to blockade and they maintain the Straits of Hormuz closed, that somehow that will eventually change the Iranian behavior, that is misguided. Because you got to look at their situations through their eyes, not through our eyes, and what's reasonable. They will absorb this economic suffering from the blockade because they don't care about their people. Gas lines, electricity shut down. They'll put up with all of that. For what reason? Just to survive. And we have to understand who they really are, and they are absolutely hardliners here. So I think the most reasonable path going forward is finish what we started, and that's return to combat operations and open up the straits. That's the best course of action now.
That's a very important point. It was your last one and a good point to make. But President Trump, in the last hour, he just posted on Truth that they got a message from the Iranians. And I will say that in the Truth, he said that Iran says they are in a state of collapse. And so I was reading today about there are experts who think that Iran has 2 days, 2 months, maybe even a little bit longer, but not much longer, before their oil capacities are tapped out and possibly they suffer irreversible damage. Is that persuasive to you at all, or do you think that nobody should wait for that?
Well, I think we underestimate the regime, and we've done that more than once. The reality is, yes, we've taken away 80% of their revenues. That's not sustainable. At some point, the regime will economically collapse if we do that. But in the near term, they will do everything that they can, Dana. I just keep coming back to this point, to survive. Because they don't care about their people. They've already proven it, given all the economic woes they had before we put the blockade in place. And that's where they are. Let's finish it, is my recommendation. The status quo, they'll drag it on for weeks and for months. That in terms of blockade, and they shut down the Straits of Hormuz, and all these other countries are suffering as a result of it. We have a much better solution than that, and that is go back to the original plan, as I stated.
General Jack Keane, on a pivotal day there, thank you so much for being here with us.
By the time this interview is over, the ceasefire no longer feels like a cooling moment. It feels like suspended danger. And that is what makes this clip so compelling. Jack Keane is not describing a region that has stepped back from the edge. He is describing a region that may still be standing on it, pretending to negotiate while waiting to see who blinks first. His argument is blunt. Iran's latest proposals are not serious attempts to solve the core issue. They are designed to drag out the clock, deepen economic and political pressure on the White House, and create the hope that time itself will force concessions that combat could not. That is the heart of this story. Not simply whether talks are happening, but whether talks are being used as diplomacy or as cover. And once that possibility enters the room, every sentence in the exchange starts carrying a second meaning. Because if the process is only delay, then delay itself becomes strategy. If the offer is not resolution, then the offer may be camouflage. And if the ceasefire is only buying time, then the calm viewers are looking at maybe the most deceptive phase of the conflict so far. Keane's language is powerful because he keeps reducing the issue to motive. He is not merely saying that Iran disagrees with Washington. He is saying the regime believes time is on its side. That matters because it turns the story into a psychological contest. Iran, in his telling, is not just making policy moves, it is making a bet that the president will eventually accept the status quo or settle for a weaker deal, rather than re-enter combat and finish what earlier operations left incomplete. This is why the line, "Finish what we started," lands so hard. It is not just a military recommendation. It is a rejection of the idea that extended negotiation under these conditions is neutral. Keane frames prolonged talks as dangerous precisely because they can reward stalling. And once stalling is rewarded, every day that passes can strengthen the belief that hardliners do not need to compromise. They only need to endure. The interview becomes even more intense when Keane expands the conversation beyond talks and into pressure. He acknowledges that the blockade is hurting Iran badly. Revenues are collapsing. Economic strain is mounting. The regime is weaker than before. But then he delivers the warning that gives this clip its deepest tension. Outsiders may be overestimating what economic suffering alone can change. In his view, Iran's rulers do not experience pressure the way ordinary democracies do. They are willing to let their own population endure gas lines, blackouts, shortages, and pain if it keeps the regime alive. That point changes the meaning of the entire debate, because now the question is no longer just whether pressure is working. It is whether pressure is working fast enough, and whether the regime's tolerance for human suffering makes waiting more dangerous than acting. That is where the clip becomes more than punditry. It becomes a theory of power, a theory that some governments can absorb enormous internal pain, so long as survival at the top remains possible. And if that theory is right, then blockade without resolution may not lead to surrender. It may simply create a longer, crueler road to the same confrontation everyone claimed to be postponing. Another reason this clip works so well is that it turns a geopolitical argument into a story about unfinished business. Keane keeps returning to what he says was left undone. Roughly a quarter of the original objective, offensive capabilities that remain, the Strait of Hormuz still disrupted, the regime still intact, the wider mission incomplete. That kind of framing is highly effective for audience retention because it makes the present feel unresolved. The viewer is not watching a closed chapter. They are watching a chapter that was interrupted. And interruption is powerful storytelling fuel. It creates the sense that history paused mid-sentence and is now waiting for someone to decide how the sentence ends. The host's follow-up questions reinforce that feeling by introducing another dimension of urgency. Collapse. If Iran itself is signaling distress, if experts are saying oil capacity may be reaching a breaking point, then why not wait? Why not let internal weakness do the work? Keane's answer is what keeps the tension alive. He does not deny the regime is under massive strain. In fact, he says 80% of revenues have effectively been taken away. But he insists that the existence of collapse pressure is not the same thing as imminent strategic change. Regimes like this, he argues, can absorb more suffering than outsiders expect because preserving themselves matters more to them than protecting their citizens. This is a chilling idea, and it is one reason the clip holds attention. It forces the viewer to confront a harsh possibility that what looks from the outside like unbearable pressure may, from inside the regime, simply look like the price of surviving one more month. And if that is true, then waiting becomes less humane, not more. It means more civilian pain, more economic damage across the region, more disruption in the strait, and more time for the regime to maneuver. There is also a larger narrative structure here that makes the clip ideal for documentary-style commentary. It starts with diplomacy, moves into motive, widens into strategy, then tightens again around a single question. What happens if the pause is only helping the wrong side recover? That is a strong retention arc because it constantly widens and narrows the lens. One moment the viewer is hearing about international proposals. The next, they are hearing about oil flows, regime durability, the Strait of Hormuz, intelligence operations, and the hard reality that economic suffering does not automatically produce political surrender. Then Keane pushes even further, suggesting that intelligence services should be doing everything possible inside Iran to weaken the regime from within. That line matters because it reveals the full scope of his thinking. He is not arguing for a single military move in isolation. He is describing a multi-layered endgame: reopen the strait, neutralize remaining offensive capability, and undermine the regime while it is already under severe strain. In other words, he sees this as a moment to convert pressure into conclusion, and whether viewers agree with that prescription or not, it gives the clip a sense of high consequence. This is not analysis for analysis's sake. It is a call for decision. So the real emotional center of this video is not only fear of Iran or frustration with negotiations, it is impatience with incompletion. Keane's message is that half measures, open-ended waiting, and faith in economic pain alone may produce exactly the kind of drawn-out instability that strong action was supposed to avoid. That is why this interview feels less like a discussion of options and more like a warning against drift. And drift is one of the most powerful documentary themes there is because audiences instinctively understand what it means to watch leaders delay a decision while consequences keep gathering anyway. In the end, this clip leaves viewers with a disturbing possibility that the ceasefire they are watching may not be the beginning of peace, but the last fragile pause before a much more decisive phase. If Iran is truly stalling, if the regime truly believes time favors survival, and if the United States truly thinks unfinished objectives matter more than prolonged pressure, then the quiet in this moment is not comforting. It is loaded. It is the kind of quiet that exists when both sides know something bigger may still be coming. And that is why this video can hold an audience so strongly. It is not just saying a conflict exists. It is saying the conflict may be entering its most deceptive stage, the stage where everything sounds slower, even as the stakes become more explosive. So the final question this clip leaves behind is the one that keeps viewers watching and commenting. Is this ceasefire a path away from war, or the last delay before someone decides there is no point delaying any longer. If you want to understand why this moment feels so unstable, watch the silence carefully, because sometimes the loudest warning in geopolitics is not the strike. It is the pause that comes right before the decision to finish it.